welcome to the CEO Summit. We're glad to have you as a guest today and just appreciate your time with us. Dave Prowten has been the CEO of JDRF, the Junior Diabetes Research Foundation. And Dave, maybe give us just a quick overview of yourself and the organization.
Sure. First of all, thank you for the invite to be here. And I retired about 14 months ago from JDRF, so it was a wonderful journey. I was there for 10 years as the CEO, and it's a really interesting organization because it focuses solely on type 1 diabetes, but it's a global organization. So we work we were the Canadian affiliate within a global organization. So what was one of the neat things about it is, we were sort of charged with operating within Canada.
Yeah.
But we really benefited from being global and having one global research strategy and having a bunch of peers around the world that you could lean on for advice. And so in some ways it was a great model to be working in, and I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to sort of work within that for 10 years and to hopefully made a little bit of difference and left it in good shape when I left, which I feel really confident in because I know we're talking about succession planning, and
Exactly.
a great leader followed me.
Yeah, and so that's what I wanted to talk about today. But before we get to succession, you obviously had to have built some leadership into the organization before you could do a succession plan. So maybe could we step back, whatever that time frame might be, and just talk about how did you develop the organization from an emerging leader's perspective, and then we'll talk about succession.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you make, because when you think about, what you're charged with as a CEO is really developing a team. That's one of the most important things. I think we can often obviously work on mission and fundraising and advocacy, whatever the core, deliverables are of the organization, but having a strong team is critical to the success today and tomorrow.
Right.
I was really blessed to have a strong head of HR at JDRF, and I was there 10 years, but I'd say, after several years, we started to work on succession planning, but not just say for the CEO, but for multiple levels in the organization. And so, when I would talk to my direct reports about what their future career aspirations were, obviously we had an annual performance review process, but part of really understanding what their aspirations were 1, 3, 5 years out. And then we did that every year, and we started to track, where do they want to go? Were there cross-training opportunities? And that really helped us have a good understanding of their future goals and objectives. It also allowed us, when it came time to talk about succession planning, to have a really good handle on, were there any internal candidates, one or more, right? Because I think that's really important to understand.
Yeah.
And then that leads to a whole process. But having that work done in advance, and so me having a visibility on it, but also our board chair and some of the board having that, was very helpful just to really understand the lay of the land, but also making sure, were we actually developing people, right?
Yeah.
I think that's just critical, because at the end of the day, you do want to have some bench strength, and I think that's really, really important for an organization.
So were there a couple of practical things that you did in developing the team along those lines?
Yeah, well, one of them was literally it was almost formalizing a process so that every year when I talked to the team about, we had a succession planning discussion, I'd fill in a form. I mean, it sounds but it was the same form, and then it would get filed with HR, because, the whole thing is, if I got hit by a bus and nobody knew what was going on, so we actually had the discussions, documented them, and sort of filed them away. So, that was actually really helpful, I think, just as a practical step.
Yeah.
I also think just having an ongoing performance management system is really important, because I think, people deserve to know if they're doing a great job and if there's areas to work on. And I think as a leader, right, you are always trying to find that balance between giving positive feedback and giving constructive feedback so that they can continue to develop. So I think those two are really critical. I don't think it's just an annual thing, though. You have to do this on a regular basis, right? You have to talk to people and just sort of make sure that they're getting feedback regularly. The old no surprises is a really good thing to credo to live by, I think.
Yeah. So beyond the practical, Dave, I mean, you've obviously walked through a significant succession planning process with your board and evidently with the team as well. Just talk to us a little bit about how did that, what was that transition like, and how did those discussions start with the board, first of all?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting for me to reflect on because I'd
Hmm.
been there about 8 years,
Hmm.
and in many ways, we'd never really had a succession planning discussion. In some ways, the first time it happened, it was almost a bit uncomfortable because it was almost, you wonder, geez, are they trying to send me a signal? It's time to go.
Right. Yeah.
But really, when I reflected back, it was sort of framed as, David, if you want to stay until you're 65, that's great. But if you aren't going to do that, the board would just love some visibility on what your plans are. And frankly, I'd given it a little bit of thought, but not a ton of thought. So I give our board chair a lot of credit because, he kickstarted the discussions, and it took, I would say several months to sort of have the discussions and really talk about what my plans were, and the potential timing, and then they were that would then lead to our board chair sharing that with the board in
Mm.
confidence, right, in the
Sure.
in-camera sessions and etc. But I think it was all done in a way that was very respectful of where I was wanting to go. I would say though, if it happened in say year 1 or 2, I might have felt a little differently. But once again, in retrospect, right, um, you should have a succession plan in place, because what if something happens, right? Like, you can't
Absolutely.
control everything, and so I think it's a kind of incumbent on the board to kick that off. I
Hmm.
also don't think the board chairs or boards necessarily want to have those conversations, in all honesty, because I think if you're a board member, right, hiring or firing a CEO is one of the core responsibilities.
Yeah.
But if do you really want to do that if you've got, like, that's not necessarily why you signed up to be a volunteer leader, right? You
That's
actually want to kind of steward the organization, make it more successful. Finding a CEO is actually tough work, and
it
it
is.
really
Yeah.
requires a lot of thought. So I think it's one of those important things to have in place,
Hmm.
because you can't control every variable.
Yeah, absolutely. So you ultimately did choose somebody from internal, in your, well, you didn't, the board did, but in the last transition of that, what did that feel like when you handed it off to your, I think it was your VP of philanthropy, if I'm not mistaken?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think once again, the board ran a process, right? Where I think, so just to step back a little bit. So, the board and I sort of sorted out where I was going to go. And then they had to kick off a process, and they had to determine, the variables. Are they going to do an internal search
Yeah.
first? Are they going to do an internal and external search, right? It leads to a whole bunch of process discussions for them.
Yeah.
And but so the board did their thing, right? And they made a great decision, because Jessica's is a great leader for the organization. And
Sure.
we then developed a really robust transition plan. And one of the things that we had a lot of time to actually work on it, but then also a significant amount of time to implement it. And I would say, it led to, communications with our donors, with our team. We were very, very thoughtful about how we rolled it out.
Hmm.
And in many ways, then we also did a bit of a tour together to introduce Jessica to anybody that she hadn't met, or some of the advocacy discussions, so some of the areas that were sort of outside of her traditional responsibilities. How do we actually make sure that she's got more exposure to the people, but also to, what we're working on strategically. So,
Mm.
it really, it was very intentional
Hmm.
and thought out. And I think just we tried to communicate it as clearly as possible, internally and externally. So it just didn't become a real, hopefully an unsettling point for the organization
Yeah.
and the donors and supporters.
So you said you've been gone 14 months now.
Uh,
Um, what's been the feedback that you've gotten since your departure and with Jessica taking over?
yeah. Well, I think we've had some positive feedback on how the whole thing was rolled out. I mean, I think both Jessica and I would probably say, because she'd been there 7 or 8 years, we probably didn't need as long a transition time, right? Like, she actually was ready to roll, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And in some cases, just as a point of reference, she took the senior leadership team away on a retreat to work on, the annual plan, when I was still sort of there, but I didn't go to it, right? We had to find some points where she'd had the runway to sort of develop the leadership, and develop the future plans. And I think that
Good.
was all really kind of, we would just work that out. But I think, look, we knew Jessica was going to be a terrific leader, right? I think that
Mhm.
was just, and I think the team has, they've done great things, from my distant view of,
Yeah.
but
Sure.
I think she's going to be a great leader, and I think the board made a great decision. And
Yeah.
And so I think we all felt really good that she was the right person to lead JDRF, now called Breakthrough T1D, into the future. So not only is there a new leader, there's a new brand for JDRF, which is pretty exciting for her to have, like, something fresh, globally to be part of too.
Oh, that's great. No, I didn't know
Mhm.
that. That's interesting.
Mhm.
Okay, with just a final thought before we close here. I mean, you were there for 10 years. You helped build that team up. You and the board and Jessica moved through a transition process. Uh, Good communication, good planning, all of those things. Your advice to somebody who might be in your position now, or in the position you were in now, and wondering how to bring this up either with their board or with any internal staff. Any advice? Just some highlights or insights that you might have.
I think that's a really, really great question, because I think it all starts with trust, right?
Hmm.
It's sometimes an overused word, but when you think about having that discussion, for example, with your board chair,
Yeah,
right, it could feel uncomfortable.
yeah,
So you have to have that trusted relationship and it goes both ways. The board chair has to have the trust of the head of the organization to sit down and say, hey, this is really a risk management, responsibility of the board. We just want to ensure that, on a regular basis, we're checking in, seeing how you're feeling. Do you have any future plans? And I think that also then, trust is really important with your senior leadership team as the head of the organization, right? So I just think the way to have those organizations is to build that trust. It doesn't happen overnight, but I do think if you're not in a situation where you've got trust, that frankly, that would make it that much more difficult, I think, too.
yeah, yeah. No, that's good. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your insights today. Appreciate you sharing that with us and your journey. Just grateful for your time. Thank you.
You're very welcome.